Hey, wake up. You can't sleep here. The sharp kick to his ribs jolted Sergeant Frank Williams awake. Before he could get his bearings, blinding pain shot through his body, every muscle spasming as electricity coursed through him. The young police officer stood over him, taser still crackling, a smirk plastered across his face. That got your attention, huh? Frank, 72 years old, homeless, and huddled behind Murphy's all-night diner for warmth, gasped for breath. The familiar scent of ozone filled his nostrils. 6 minutes later, the diner's early morning peace would be shattered by the disciplined arrival of heavy military vehicles, sealing off the entire block with chilling efficiency. Frank Williams knew the cold embrace of forgotten corners all too well. After 30 years in the Army, specializing in reconnaissance and long-range surveillance, mostly in places his country preferred not to acknowledge, civilian life had proven a disorienting, unwelcoming landscape. His small pension and disability payments for service-connected injuries barely kept pace with rising costs. Everything changed when his wife Sarah passed from aggressive cancer that wiped out their savings. One misstep, one unexpected medical bill, and the tightrope snapped. Now, at 72, his home was a carefully chosen alcove behind Murphy's 24-hour diner, a spot offering protection from the wind and the faint, comforting smell of frying bacon in the early mornings. He kept his few belongings in a battered duffel bag, a worn Bible, spare socks, a faded photo of Sarah, and his discharge papers wrapped in plastic. He never panhandled, never caused trouble. He just tried to remain invisible, a ghost haunting the periphery of a society that had largely forgotten men like him. But some ghosts, when awakened, can summon forces beyond imagination. Frank had found this spot behind Murphy's a few weeks ago. It was relatively safe, and Murphy, a kind man who'd seen his share of hard luck stories, sometimes left out leftover chili or day-old donuts near the dumpsters before closing. The pre-dawn chill was biting. Frank had managed a few hours of fitful sleep, huddled deep within his threadbare sleeping bag, when the rude awakening came. It wasn't gentle, it was a sharp, deliberate kick to his side. Hey, get up. Can't sleep here. The voice was young, aggressive, filled with the self-importance of newly acquired authority. Frank struggled to sit up, disoriented, his old joints screaming in protest. Through blurry eyes, he saw two figures silhouetted against the faint glow of the diner's back alley light. Police officers, their uniforms crisp, expressions hard. What's wrong, officer? Frank managed, his voice raspy with sleep and cold. What's wrong? The younger officer, let's call him Rodriguez, scoffed. You're what's wrong. Vagrancy, loitering on private property. Pick one. His partner, older and more world-weary, Officer Thompson, hung back slightly, observing. I wasn't bothering anyone, Frank said, trying to gather his wits. Just trying to stay warm. Murphy, the owner, he doesn't mind. Murphy ain't here at 4 a.m., old man, Rodriguez snapped, taking a step closer, his hand resting on the taser holstered on his belt. And we mind. This area's had complaints about homeless camps. You fit the description. Got ID. Frank fumbled in his duffel with stiff, cold hands. He produced his VA medical card and driver's license, its address now meaningless. Rodriguez barely glanced at them. VA card, huh? Lots of guys claim to be vets. Doesn't give you a free pass to sleep on the streets. What Rodriguez didn't know was that some veterans carry more than just memories of their service. Frank felt familiar weariness wash over him. He'd learned long ago that arguing with belligerent authority was usually pointless, often dangerous. I'll move along, officer, he said quietly, beginning to gather his meager belongings. Just give me a minute. We don't have a minute, Rodriguez said, his voice rising. We want you out of here now. He invaded Frank's personal space. You deaf, old-timer, or just slow? Frank continued packing his sleeping bag, movements deliberate, ignoring the taunt. This seemed to enrage Rodriguez further. He saw it as defiance. Resisting, are we? Rodriguez sneered. Maybe a little jolt will speed you up. Before Frank could react, before Officer Thompson could intervene, even if he'd wanted to, Rodriguez drew his taser. No warning. No further attempt at de-escalation. Just the bright yellow weapon, the sharp distinctive crackle as it armed, and then blinding, searing agony as the barbs struck Frank's chest. Frank cried out, an involuntary sound torn from his throat as every muscle seized. He collapsed against the brick wall, vision swimming, the acrid smell of ozone filling his nostrils. He lay gasping, convulsing, the world a blur of pain and flashing lights. Rodriguez stood over him, taser still pointed, grim satisfaction on his youthful face. That got your attention, huh? Now are you going to move, or you want another dose? Officer Thompson finally stepped forward, unease flickering in his eyes. Rodriguez, that's enough. He's an old man. He wasn't resisting. Looked like resisting to me, Rodriguez retorted, though he lowered the taser slightly. As the initial shock wore off, a different kind of cold settled in Frank. The cold fury of a man who had dedicated his life to service, only to be treated like dangerous refuse. But Frank Williams carried something Rodriguez couldn't see, something that would change everything in exactly 6 minutes. Frank lay on the cold ground, his body trembling uncontrollably, the pain slowly receding but leaving behind profound, nauseating weakness. He could hear the officers talking above him, their voices distorted. A deep, burning shame washed over him, not for his situation, but for the casual brutality he'd just endured. He had faced enemy combatants with more respect than this. Officer Thompson spoke into his radio, voice flat and professional. Dispatch, be advised, subject detained, possible vagrancy, some minor resistance. Requesting transport for one elderly male. No medical assistance required. Subject is compliant now. Compliant. Frank almost laughed, a bitter, silent sound. He was compliant because his body was still recovering from being electrocuted. Still lying on the ground, vision slowly clearing, Frank reached with a trembling hand into the inner pocket of his field jacket. His fingers closed around a small, smooth metallic object, a military challenge coin, old and worn, bearing the insignia of a very specific, very discreet unit. On the reverse was an unlisted emergency contact number, reserved for dire situations, connecting directly to a Joint Special Operations Liaison office. He'd never used it in civilian life. Never imagined he would need to. But this felt dire. This felt like betrayal. Rodriguez was prodding him with his boot. Get up on your feet. Let's go. With immense effort, Frank fumbled for his ancient, ruggedized cell phone, a relic from his last active duty deployment. Rodriguez watched, sneering. Calling your lawyer, Grandpa? Good luck with that. Frank ignored him. His fingers, still clumsy, managed to dial the number from the coin. It connected on the first ring. A calm, professional voice, devoid of emotion, answered. Watchtower. Identify. Frank cleared his throat, his voice weak but steady. Williams, Frank. Sergeant First Class, retired. Call sign, Shadow. Priority, designation red. Officer involved incident, unjustified use of force. Location, North Alley, rear of Murphy's Diner, corner of Oak and Maple. Requesting immediate protocol review. Brief pause. Then the voice came back, equally calm, but with an underlying current of readiness. Shadow, Watchtower copies. Location confirmed. Protocol review initiated. Standby, assets en route. ETA, 6 minutes. The line went dead. 6 minutes. Frank hoped he could last that long. The first indication that something was amiss came not as a siren, but as a subtle shift in the pre-dawn light, a flicker of unusual reflections against the diner's grimy windows. Officer Thompson, writing his report in their cruiser, looked up. Officer Rodriguez, still trying to manhandle Frank, paused. Then came the sound, a low, guttural rumble. Not of a single police vehicle, but of multiple heavy engines approaching fast. Before either officer could fully process it, the narrow alley entrances at both ends of the block were simultaneously, decisively blocked by two matte black, heavily armored tactical vehicles. Not police SWAT vans. These were something else entirely. Larger, more formidable, with no visible markings except small, discreet government plates. Doors hissed open. Figures emerged, clad in dark, non-reflective tactical gear, their movement swift, silent, utterly professional. They didn't shout commands. They simply moved, establishing a perimeter with chilling efficiency, transforming the grimy alley into a tightly controlled zone. Rodriguez and Thompson froze, hands instinctively going to their sidearms, then hesitating as they took in the sheer number and coordinated discipline of the newcomers. These weren't local cops. These weren't even standard federal agents. This was something different. A third vehicle, a black Escalade with tinted windows, glided silently into the alley, stopping directly beside where Frank lay. The rear door opened, and a man in a severe dark suit stepped out. He was older, perhaps late 50s, with a lean, hard face and eyes that missed nothing. He ignored the two bewildered police officers completely. His entire focus was on Frank. "Sergeant Williams," the man said, his voice quiet but carrying unmistakable authority. "Colonel Mitchell, Joint Task Force Watchtower. Are you injured, Sergeant?" Frank, looking up, managed a weak nod. "Taz, Colonel." Unprovoked. Colonel Mitchell's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He knelt beside Frank, his earlier formality replaced by genuine concern. "Medics are inbound, Sergeant. Just hold tight." The reckoning had begun. Colonel Mitchell rose to his full height, his presence dominating the narrow alley. His gaze, cold as winter steel, fixed on officers Rodriguez and Thompson, who stood frozen, faces showing confusion and dawning apprehension. "You too." Mitchell's voice was soft, but it sliced through the pre-dawn chill like a blade. "Identify yourselves. Now." Officer Thompson, the senior officer, found his voice, though it trembled slightly. "Officer Thompson, Metro PD. This is Officer Rodriguez. We were responding to a vagrancy call." "A vagrancy call," Mitchell repeated, voice devoid of inflection. "And your response protocol for a 72-year-old man sleeping behind a diner involves an electroshock weapon?" He looked directly at Rodriguez. "Officer Rodriguez, you deployed the taser?" Rodriguez, visibly sweating despite the cold, stammered. He was resisting, sir. Non-compliant." "Resisting what, officer?" Mitchell pressed. "Resisting being kicked awake? Resisting your attempt to deprive him of his only shelter? Or perhaps resisting your manifest incompetence?" Just then, two more figures in tactical gear appeared, clearly medical personnel carrying advanced trauma kits. They immediately began attending to Frank, their movements efficient and gentle. Mitchell turned back to the officers. "Your sidearms. Place them on the hood of your vehicle. Now, you are both being detained pending a full federal investigation into civil rights violations, assault under color of authority, and potential elder abuse." "Federal?" Officer Thompson exclaimed, his face draining of color. "On what grounds? This is a local matter." "It became a federal matter, officer," Mitchell stated coldly, the moment Officer Rodriguez deployed his taser on a retired United States Army Sergeant First Class with a distinguished 30-year service record, a man whose last active assignment involved direct support to sensitive national security operations. Mitchell's voice grew harder. "Sergeant Williams is not just some vagrant. He is under the continued, albeit discreet, protective interest of certain agencies. And you gentlemen have just made yourselves a very significant problem." The two officers, under the unwavering gaze of Mitchell and his silent, imposing team, slowly, reluctantly unholstered their weapons and placed them on their cruiser. Their careers, they were beginning to realize, had just taken a very sharp, very downward turn. But Frank's story was far from over. The arrival of the federal team was swiftly followed by a visibly agitated police chief and several internal affairs detectives, transforming the grimy alley into a hive of official activity. Frank was carefully examined by the military medics, who confirmed no lasting physical injuries from the tossing, though he was clearly shaken and suffering from exposure. Colonel Mitchell personally ensured Frank was given warm blankets, hot coffee, and a quiet space in one of their vehicles to recover while the bureaucratic storm raged around him. Officers Rodriguez and Thompson were formally relieved of duty by their own chief, badges and IDs confiscated on the spot, pending both internal and federal investigation. The chief, after a very brief, very intense, and very one-sided conversation with Colonel Mitchell, looked like he'd aged 10 years. He stammered apologies to Frank, promising a full and transparent inquiry. Mitchell simply nodded, expression unreadable. See that you do, Chief. This department's conduct toward veterans, particularly vulnerable ones, will be under enhanced scrutiny. He then made arrangements for Frank. Sergeant Williams, we have a secure room for you at a government guest house downtown. Warm bed, hot meals, medical follow-up. A team from the VA and my liaison office will meet you there this morning to sort out your housing and benefit situation. Permanently. This should never have happened. Frank, wrapped in a warm blanket, sipping coffee, looked at the colonel. A flicker of his old self returned to his eyes. Thank you, Colonel. Didn't think anyone still remembered the old call signs. Some call signs, Sergeant, Mitchell said quietly, are never forgotten, especially not by those who understand their meaning. You served your country with honor. It's time your country served you with the same. As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows down the alley, the military convoy prepared to depart, taking Frank with them. Murphy, the diner owner, had arrived for his morning shift and stood watching in stunned silence as the man he sometimes left chilly for was escorted with profound respect into a black government vehicle by a stern-faced colonel. The message left hanging in the crisp morning air was unspoken but undeniable. Some lines, once crossed, trigger a response far beyond local jurisdiction. And some sleeping veterans are guarded by more than just threadbare blankets. Their quiet call for help can still summon a formidable force. Because loyalty, like honor, doesn't retire. Subscribe to Everyday Hero Files if you believe that every veteran deserves dignity, respect, and swift justice when those are violated, and that sometimes the quietest alarms summon the most powerful response.